Hello everyone, Rob Rousseau here, just reminding you to please smash the subscribe button as well as the bell and the thumbs up, leave a comment, and hey, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe over on Patreon, patreon.com/Rob Rousseau. Okay, that's all. I'll talk to you later. Bye. Hey Colin, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be on.
Yeah, it's great to have both of you on. I really appreciate you sticking around so we could chat. Would you two just like to briefly just sort of introduce yourselves to the viewers and just let us know who we're talking to and what you guys are doing right now?
Yeah, sounds good. You want to go first?
Yeah, so my name is Kolin Sutherland Wilson. I am Gitxsan of the Gitxsan Hetwit House of the Fireweed Clan. And right now we're on Wolf Clan territory, the territory known as Stekioidna, where the All Clans Railway Blockade is currently in place.
Yeah, and I'm Kai. A long time ago, I was a CBC and CTV journalist, and now I live in northern BC, and I don't know, get into all kinds of trouble with this guy and other cool folks who are resisting basically the corporate takeover of unceded Indigenous territories and fossil fuel expansion, like the Coastal GasLink pipeline and other totally unsustainable, greedy resource extraction and land theft. So, yeah, that's what we're working on right now.
So the last time the three of us spoke, we were talking a lot about the old growth logging blockades that were going on in BC, and really the situation has shifted a lot over the last couple of months, right? And it's now we're focusing a lot more on the Coastal GasLink pipeline, right? That's what this is about, right?
That's the trigger, yeah, for sure. Do you want to talk about how the...
Yeah, it's fundamentally, it's all the exact same fight. Like, we were up against a hostile world power, and that's Canada, or like we often refer to it as the Crown, because, yeah, they're hostile in the fact that, you know, even before they come to our territories with these projects, before they bring their injunctions and their enforcement, their SERG, which is basically a paramilitary force that's essentially an industry emergency response team. Before any of that, like one important thing to always remember is that, yeah, these are unceded territories, and Canada has a fundamental position where they are continuously trying to push for the surrender of Indigenous land because there is no formal agreement, nothing to legitimize Canada actually existing on their territories. So they come to us in treaty negotiations and they tell us, you can only keep 4% of your territory. You are not allowed to govern under your traditional system. You have to have an elected band council represent your nation in accordance with the Canadian Charter of Human Rights. And basically, they come and tell us that we will never recognize your culture, we will never recognize your government, we will never recognize your territories. You have to surrender it. And that's the backdrop to everything that's happening. So whether it's forestry, clear cutting, whether it's mining or Coastal GasLink, fundamentally what we are fighting for is the existence of our government, which predates Canada by ice ages. And yeah, ultimately, we are just trying to remain Indigenous, remain Gitxsan, remain Wet'suwet'en, to live by our culture, our laws, our protocols, everything that we are taught growing up, that Canada is trying to erase through assimilation. And so fundamentally, it's all the same fight. Even now, you probably heard there's some rednecks driving by doing war whoops at us. Like we have to deal with this on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an uphill battle from the get-go. So when you have, you know, these Canadian representatives or politicians or anyone who are trying to say, oh, we are impartial, like, you know, this is just a yet another court order, like following the rule of law. Like, we have to understand their rule of law is in every way geared towards stripping us of our land and our right to self-govern.
Yeah, And so this is something that both of you educated me a lot on the last time we spoke, because a lot of the time when it comes to the BC government, or when it comes to these oil conglomerates that are building like the CGL pipeline, will often say, "Oh no, we did do these negotiations. We negotiated with these First Nations and these band councils." But this is also something that I was ignorant of myself, which is that these band councils, despite the fact that, of course, there's many people within this system that are working to like better their own communities within this system, this is a system that's part of our colonial government, and it's established by the Indian Act, and it's a way for our government to enable this process and to kind of have this facade of consent to the Indigenous people that are being affected by it. But that's really not really accurate, right? That's not a really accurate version of what the actual events are.
Yeah, I can speak to that one. Because, in this part of the world, from 1880 onwards, they had Canada had introduced a piece of legislation they called the Indian Act. And from 1880 onwards, they essentially made it illegal, a criminal offense for us to gather, for us to organize politically. I've had relatives, like ancestors, who were torn out of our houses of governance, which we call the Wilps Villigate, which are loosely translated as the feast halls in English. And they died in prison. They were treated very inhumanely. They were prosecuted, criminalized, arrested, murdered, simply for trying to uphold our government way of life. And so we were forced underground for a long time. And while that was happening, they imposed the band councils as a way to restrict our people to these tiny little tracts of territory they call reserves. And these reserves were essentially meant to contain us, which we, from then until this point, they refer to us as the Indian problem, to contain us so that they can open up our territories to resource extraction and to settlement. And so the band councils have always been a tool of dispossession, a tool of delegitimizing our hereditary governments. They are an imposed government that is directly funded, created, and subservient to the federal government, the people who are in the midst of colonizing these territories. And there are so many myths about these band councils that do exist that are perpetuated in the media. Just for example, like the notion that they are democratic, because that has been a huge rallying point in the delegitimization of our hereditary chiefs. Because when people hear hereditary chiefs, they just look at the word hereditary. They think, okay, this must be equivalent to the European monarchy, or, something we have in our political history that we don't agree with. Yet
it's almost a dog whistle.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a deliberate translation, right? Like it's a very deliberately chosen word, but that's just the English, the chosen English word to describe a system that honestly has a 10,000 year track record of success versus the sort of liberal democracy that we pride ourselves on over the last 100 years, which is going down in flames.
Yeah.
So the whole idea is like we don't have an elite caste of people coming from some sort of elite bloodline that make all the decisions that govern our people. That's not at all what that is meant to represent. Like we come from a clan-based kinship network. So whenever we say, or the words hereditary houses or hereditary chiefs, that's simply referring to the fact that everybody within a house is related. We all have shared equal rights. We all have a say. We all have the opportunity to attain roles or responsibilities, whether that's leadership or any other form of higher responsibility within our governance system. And it's simply a means of distinguishing our own citizenship throughout the nation. It has nothing to do with what the mainstream portrays it as being some type of, antiquated, like monarchical system of elite chiefs that don't represent the people, when like the reality is like, these so-called hereditary chiefs, which, we have words for them in our language, much more accurate, like Simgigap, Sigidam Hanaf, which translate more so to the real ancient people, because they carry on titles and names that are tens of thousands of years old. They carry histories, and they have a responsibility to the people to essentially uphold our legacy, to uphold our laws, our rules. And historically, the hereditary chiefs have always been the poorest people in the village. Like, it's a life of servitude to the people. And it's, dissimilar from Western politics, where everyone's vying for leadership positions. Instead, like for us, we don't want to have that role. We do not want to be a hereditary chief, because you eat last. You make sure everyone else is eating first. You're the poorest person in the village. So we have our traditional system. Like I could probably go on for a long time about, just the ethics and the, our history of that. But we have this band council system, which is highly problematic. It's based on a system of assimilation that was designed in the Indian Act, the band councils, the reserve, all of it designed to whittle off our population, to restrict our membership through the use of these racist tools imposed by the Canadian state, such as blood quantum. For a long time, like if you were to enlist in the army, or if you were a woman and married a non-native man, you would have your citizenship or your band membership stripped of you arbitrarily by these laws. And so, first of all, I'd say that's hardly the basis of any type of democracy. Like, although, a lot of the media, a lot of the proponents of Coastal GasLink like to talk about how it's such a beautiful democratic system, the band council. And also, like, I just want to say, band councils come from, or, the environment around band councils is defined by hundreds of years of confinement, of oppression, of systematic impoverishment, and essentially, like a band council election at this point, I could say with certainty, as a band councillor myself, from the, Kispiok's Indian Reserve number 1, which was imposed upon my family's ancient village of Anspayach. As a band councillor, I could say that band council elections are nothing but a nepotistic orgy of, families holding power in order to maintain the gravy trains of honoraria. And it's, not every band council may be like that, but for the most part, and I'll certainly say, like, in general, it's an imposed colonial system that's highly problematic, that is being co-opted right now, or not even co-opted. It was always originally designed to delegitimize our own hereditary chiefs. And so, like with Coastal GasLink, with Sutherland, I often ask, okay, so what democratic processes took place where the proponents of this project can confidently say that the people decided, the majority of the people decided in favor of this project? And yet there's no referenda. There's no means of actually gauging what the Wet'suwet'en population actually wants, yet you have all these talking points being thrown out by especially kind of far-right media saying, 80% of the Wet'suwet'en people are for this project. 99% of the Wet'suwet'en people are for this project. I've seen every number under the sun. But I could tell you about one referendum I know that took place. I believe that was with the Nakazli, where they asked the people, do we want this project to go through? And 70% of the people said no. And then the band council signed an impact benefit agreement regardless for this project to take place. And so I would not trust that any of these band councils at all represent the will of the people in these regards. And they're highly problematic from the get-go. And yeah, in our hereditary system, it doesn't work like that. We rely on consensus, we rely on meetings, we rely on open dialogue amongst the feast and all of our community. And it's a very different principle. And I would argue for every possible way that our traditional system of governance, like refined over millennia, is far more representative of the individual citizens than any of these band council systems or any of these Western elected systems that supposedly represent us, on these territories. Because, first and foremost, we are a huge minority within this country. We absolutely have no say. Even when 99% of my village voted for NDP, because they're supposedly the best option.
Yeah.
They turn around and they just gave us a big fuck you.
Yeah.
It's, so we hardly have any trust in that system. So we gotta stick to our own. We cannot rely on the bands or Canada.
One thing also, Kai, I know this is something that you talk a lot about too. This is something that I've been trying to focus on as well. When you see what the conglomerates that are pushing CGL, the kind of things that they say about this stuff, and they talk about like the jobs and the prosperity that they're bringing to these communities, and they kind of try and sell this like it's this benevolent project to uplift everyone that's involved, while kind of conveniently ignoring the reality that the actual profits that are coming from this project are going elsewhere. They're going into foreign bank accounts for people in Texas and Saudi Arabia and all these other places, and even like the fucking, it's not even the actual resources that are being extracted. It's not like they're being used to like help these actual communities. It's not staying in Canada or increasing our energy efficiency or any of that bullshit. It's literally just being sucked away and siphoned off and sold elsewhere in these foreign markets. The profits are going into these tax havens in Switzerland and God knows where else. And yet they try to sell this like it's this benevolent project that's uplifting everyone through jobs. But when you look at like the actual jobs that are being created that, might help the odd person that's lucky enough to get one of these positions versus what the actual profits for these projects are, there's zero comparison. And all those profits are going elsewhere. It's just a project that's purely extractive. Despite the spin that these companies or like the Canadian government tries to make on these projects, right?
I mean, what they spend on labor is the bare minimum.
Yeah.
The bare minimum in order to get their shit out of the ground and get it overseas, right? Like the jobs are just a byproduct. They're a temporary byproduct of the capital process. So just to catch you up on like why we're here and what we're doing, Kolin talked about the hereditary chiefs going underground for decades, and that system is now re-emerging publicly, and these leaders are reasserting their jurisdiction, their authority over their territories. And so here we're on Spock territory. The chief here, who was hanging out like an hour ago, is Spock. And so 100 years ago, his predecessors, his ancestors, found railway surveyors coming through for the Grand Trunk Pacific Railway to lay a track right down the middle of what is now New Hazelton in Gitxsan territory, and they never gave consent for that. They never agreed to have this resource extraction corridor through their land, and so that remains an unresolved issue with the Canadian government. Even though CN Rail took over the rail line, and then they were privatized in the 90s by Chrétien and Paul Martin, they're still in trespass against Spock and against his family and against the Gitxsan Nation. So rewind 2 years, 2 winters ago in February 2020, and the Wet'suwet'en evicted Coastal GasLink from their territories. The Wet'suwet'en are next door. They're an hour down the highway to our east, and they asserted their jurisdiction. And so all of their head chiefs signed an eviction notice, kicking Coastal GasLink off of their territories. And that's when Coastal GasLink went and called in the goon squad from the RCMP. And that was the big, highly publicized second raid of Wet'suwet'en territory. The Gitxsan and the Wet'suwet'en, Kolin says they have a mutual defense pact that goes back thousands of years. And so an injury to the Wet'suwet'en, who share the same feast hall system, adopted Gitxsan, many of the same chief names, in fact. They share crests, they share clans. And so, and they share resources. I mean, the reason why there's a Wet'suwet'en village here is because of a historic landslide that cut them off from their fish access. And so the Wet'suwet'en actually have a village on Gitxsan territory. And so when the Wet'suwet'en were invaded by this corporate paramilitary, the Gitxsan sprang into action. And they applied pressure at the choke point available to them on their territory in order to bring the government to the table. And these rail blockades have gone on for decades, right? And it's I would say almost like a ceremonial function. Like rail blockades have been used as a measure of last resort in order to bring the provincial crown to the table to negotiate. Because what was at stake was getting the RCMP off of Wet'suwet'en territory. That was the demand. And so Spoke and two other high-ranking hereditary chiefs, like not protesters, not like, anonymous people in balaclavas, 3 chiefs and another, dozens of their family members stepped onto the tracks here peacefully onto land they never gave up to the railway company and said, get the cops off of Wet'suwet'en territory. And instead, CN Rail went and got an injunction and had them all arrested. And so we're now in a situation where for the last 6 weeks, since the third invasion of Wet'suwet'en territory, the RCMP has maintained a 24/7 surveillance presence here in order to deter further solidarity actions by the Gitxsan. And in addition to the police, private security guards for both CN Rail and for Coastal GasLink have teamed up with the cops in order to maintain this armed occupation, 24-hour surveillance. And what we just found out over the holidays is that CN Rail has won the right to pursue a private prosecution for criminal contempt against 3 of the people who were arrested 2 years ago. And so what that means is that you have private cops gathering evidence around injunctions that are secured by corporate lawyers. And then those corporate lawyers can take Indigenous people to court and prosecute them for criminal contempt for standing peacefully on their own land. And the penalty is up to 5 years in jail, as well as fines. And so that's what we're facing in February is 3 community members, people from here, being taken to court by a company that is, their largest shareholder is Bill Gates. Like, this is not a crown corporation. This is not some homegrown, model railroad. Like, this is an international resource extraction and logistics company. Largest shareholder is the 4th richest guy in the world. And their lawyers are now engaged in a campaign to jail Gitxsan, Simgiget, and Wilt members for standing on their own land. It's completely outrageous. And that is why there's an ongoing presence here at the tracks in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en. And that's why, the Gitxsan are not backing down. And I think that people of good conscience all across the world need to look at this as the thin edge of the wedge. Like, if they can get away with this, they always guinea pig these things on Indigenous people first.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's not like these kind of climate blockades or it's a similar sort of protest movements are going away anytime soon. As we descend further into climate chaos,
exactly,
we're going to see more and more of this kind of stuff. And it's like it's a pilot project to see what they can get away with. As they've often used the Indigenous people for this exact reason, is ensuring that they can test out these processes, which will eventually be used on all of us as we So engage in these protest movements.
Here in BC, Trans Mountain, another pipeline company, that one's federally owned, they've pioneered the use of automated injunction enforcement So, these companies don't want to spend too much on labor. They could have security guards sitting there 24 hours a day like they do here. But it's far more efficient to put up a tower like the Eye of Sauron with solar panels, with all of these infrared sensors and night vision cameras and motion detectors and loudspeakers. And so if you visit the front lines on Secwepemc territory, as both of us have in the last couple of years, you can't sleep at night because there's these fucking towers going off every time like a bat flies by the sensor, blaring this recorded message at you saying you're in violation of the injunction, you are subject to arrest, blah, blah, blah. And so you are looking at a world where like robots gather evidence of violations of these court injunctions, and without police ever being involved, you get a letter saying you are facing charges of criminal contempt. Show up on this Zoom link so you can be tried by a judge that used to be a corporate lawyer for these companies, and then they show up and take you to jail. It's getting very dystopian very quickly.
Yes.
In BC.
I was seeing too, like, footage of, I mean, the way you're describing it, it seems so obvious what is going on. It gets frustrating that more people don't see this link. When you see like agents of the state in the RCMP basically acting as the hired goons for these massive resource extraction conglomerates. You even have Justin Trudeau the other day literally saying Canada's a corporation. He had that Freudian slip there. It's so clear what's going on. And I guess it becomes frustrating that more people don't get locked in and realizing what's happening here. Like, I was seeing that footage the other day of that sort of anonymous RCMP guy. They've got those like banned Blue Lives Matter Canada flags, the blue line, basically a crypto fascist symbol that we all recognize at this point. Yep. What you're describing is fascism. It's literally right out of the fascism textbook that this country helped to create, and that other countries in Europe ended up using to great effect to, destroy and commit genocide themselves. And it's amazing to just see this playbook continuing to be played out here, and this sort of reaction that we get from our political class across the spectrum, even the benevolent social democrats in the NDP who are literally overseeing all this are just rubber stamping it. It's truly incredible to see this.
It's very true. Sometimes I just wake up and wonder, what's it going to take for us to just live as human beings, like on the land once again, without, this brutal system just constantly weighing down on you, surveilling you at every turn.
Yeah.
It's so like one thing I just wanted to point out, these movements, I think, especially with Indigenous people on unceded land, like that's one of our best tools we got to fight back right now, especially if it comes to things like the environment going into the future. Because I honestly don't see any way forward within their system. Like, we have to just take it by the reins through our own governance, through our own way of life. And what concerns me is that, we really need to be going all in on Wet'suwet'en right now. Because when it comes to unceded lands, when it comes to the rights and title of Indigenous peoples, the Wet'suwet'en and Gitxsan are enemy number one of Canada. We fought them for years. The famous Delgamuukw court cases going all the way back to the 80s.
You got a living mom or what?
Oh yeah, I could bring one out in a second. Hey.
Wood for you for a bit.
Great, cool. Hey. All right, we just had a cousin show up offering to split some wood for us.
Very nice.
To finish that thought, so Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en, enemy number one to Canada. We fought them through the courts. They, through in the 91 decision, they pretty much were able to secure a ruling that said that all Aboriginal rights and title was entirely extinguished across all of BC. They basically said that British Columbia and Canada had the power to erase us from the face of history, to simply Yeah, without any due process. But we had to fight that. And I think there's a lot of nations, like especially within BC, especially within unceded territories, who recognize the role that the Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en had in this. And this panicked BC, this panicked Canada. The fact that we were able to assert, even within their system, because we will always say within our own system that we have not ceded a single inch of our territories. These are our homelands. We don't have any other homelands. This is all, we're not asking for anything more than what has always been ours for millennia. But the fact that we, within their system, using their logic, their racist colonial courts, managed to establish a precedent that one, British Columbia and Canada never had the authority or the power to extinguish our title to our territory. And two, this led to, I guess, the reinvigoration of the whole treaty process, because before that, they basically said, fuck it, we just took all the land of the natives, they can just stay on the reserves and complain. But we changed that up, and that brought industry to a panic.
Yeah.
That brought forestry to a panic, oil and gas, all of them. And they started colluding with BC right from the get-go, right from 97 onwards, in order to facilitate the surrender of our lands. So within that grand scheme of things, what's happening with Sutherland right now is the cutting edge of this long-standing fight to essentially erase true Indigenous governance from Canada.
Yeah.
The Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en beat them at their own game.
Yeah.
They destroyed Canada with facts and logic. And Canada has been after it ever since. And they are trying to make an example out of the Gitxsan and the Wet'suwet'en 30 years later.
Yeah. And they destroyed them in the marketplace of ideas.
Yep. Facts don't care about your feelings, Canada. The Gitxsan clearly proved, through Canada's own negligence, racism, and arrogance, that they don't own the land. Never did. And so now this naked show of force is the natural next step in land theft, because they can't do it through the courts anymore. They have to just assert raw power. And that's why they're bringing cops in strapped with assault rifles, 30-round magazines, body armor, tasers, leg holsters, dogs.
Like you were saying the other day, more heavily armed than troops patrolling Vietnam in the 60s
Absolutely.
and 70s.
Yeah, when you look at the American war machine in Vietnam in the 70s, the police officers here in New Hazelton tonight watching us are more heavily armed. And we've just, we're frogs in boiling water. We've just sort of normalized this, I guess, across Canada. But here on Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en territory, it's not a metaphor. It's not a joke. It is an occupying colonial force. And the message is, if you do not submit to the takeover of your lands and the theft of your resources, then we will crush you. And that is what they're here to do. So I agree with Kolin. This is this is not some backwater. This is the hot spot. This is the colonial frontier. And this is where the Canadian project lives or dies, basically. Because if they can get away with this, then it becomes the template to do this all over the country. The Gitxsan and the Wet'suwet'en are symbolic for Canada because of that Delgamuukw court case, because of that epic court precedent, which unlocked these title claims all across BC and Canada. And so this is the place to come and nip it in the bud, to try to finish what they started. And if they succeed, if they can just turn these corporations loose on an ancient system of governance that's been in place for tens of thousands of years, and they succeed in putting those people in jail, we're right back to the 1850s. And that is where Canada, that is their true agenda. That is where they want to go. And unless it's resisted by good-hearted people all across this country through every means accessible to us, they're going to just keep trying. They've got unlimited resources.
It's even more, I think it's even more disgusting in light of the incredibly grim and gruesome discoveries of these mass graves outside of the residential schools, which for a brief moment in Canada was kind of taking this spotlight, and you had a lot of political figures and media figures kind of paying lip service to this and talking about these mistakes. You know, we always hear about the terrible mistakes that happened in the past, and now you can see how much of it they've been in such a hurry to just completely move on from that. Even though these discoveries are still being made right now, that's been an ongoing process of discovering these mass graves.
Nope, put the flags back up. Got to put the flags up the top of the foot.
Yeah, exactly. We said sorry a couple times. We acknowledged a few of these incidents. Now we want to move on. And then all the while, this process of exploitation and theft and genocide continues. And another thing I wanted to focus on also is you talked about the flashpoint of 2019 and when this initial armed invasion of Wet'suwet'en territory happened that kicked off these initial rail blockades, which really spread rapidly around the country and was for a moment in for February 2020, right before the pandemic began, really felt like something new and really remarkable and incredible was happening. And for one, I mean, seeing the reaction to that from our political leaders and our media leaders was very radicalizing as well, to see the way that they immediately united in opposition to that and to try and downplay it and discredit it immediately. And then, of course, immediately, like while this is really beginning, this global pandemic happens, which kind of scuttles this movement of Indigenous solidarity that we were seeing. And like you pointed out last time we were talking, Kai, the pandemic was literally used by the BC government, by the RCMP, and by these exploitative extraction companies, whether it's with old growth logging or mining or fossil fuels, to double down and triple down on these projects and ensure that they can continue it, because it was much more difficult to resist in this, like, during this health crisis. So I guess what I'm wondering from you two is, now that this sort of process is beginning again, and we're trying to reinstitute these blockades and begin this movement, have you noticed, do you think it's possible that it will catch on in the same way that it seemed like it was catching on before? Or do you think that, like, more people are going to start getting involved in these blockades throughout the country, as we saw in January, February of 2020? Or how do you think this has been going so far?
Well, we're running out of other options.
Yeah.
Like, time is just moving very quickly now. Very, very quickly. In BC, in the last 6 or 7 months, we've had hundreds of people killed by unprecedented heat wave, and then more people killed by landslides and floods. And like, we're starting to lose bodies. Like, we're losing people now.
And these are all interconnected as well. These climate crises, you see the fires lead to more flooding because there's less trees to prevent this natural process from occurring. All linked together. It's like it's this feedback loop that we're seeing play out. Right. Right.
So we're in this, like, permanent emergency now in BC, and there's both, like, enormous potential and a huge challenge in that, because the potential is, like, normal's gone. Some people are still in denial about that, but the pre-COVID world is never coming back. The pre-climate crisis world is never coming back. And in BC, that's just a little bit more obvious. And so there are people who are just letting go. They're just like, okay, fuck it. Like, you know what? Houses went up 35% in Squamish last year. I'm never buying a house. I'm never getting that white picket fence. There is no happily ever after, right? And they are just committing themselves to, I think, more radical and emancipatory politics, because they can see that the system is coming apart at the seams and it's never going to serve them. But at the same time, so many of our brothers and sisters are just, like, struggling to survive. And that's the double-edged sword, is that because we've been so weakened by all these decades of austerity and neoliberalism, because places like this have never been a priority for government services, there's not that much to retreat. And so, like, this is just a grim statistic, but I think it has to be shared. This health region, like this little place where we live, population 4,000, has the highest mortality rate from the poison drug crisis in all of BC, of any health region, including the downtown east side and Vancouver. There are families here that are just paralyzed by grief. It's just one funeral after another. And in between, all of the other sort of emergencies of daily life, with none of the sort of per capita services or resources that you would expect in a city in Canada. And so people are just trying to fucking survive. And to ask them to then take on the additional risk of steering that genocidal machine right in the teeth, it's tough. And that's why I think there's a need for people who do have more privilege, more resources, to support the front lines directly wherever they can, and to take on some of those risks as well. Because it's our government that's doing this. These are our institutions that are inflicting this trauma and stealing this land. And so unless like Canadians or non-Indigenous people, settlers, immigrants, however you identify yourself, unless those people start to take active measures to defang and disarm these institutions, the damage that they have the capacity to do is immense. And basically Canada's a cornered animal right now. The RCMP is a cornered animal. I mean, they know how quickly that organization's going down the tubes. They can't even recruit enough new cops to replace the people that are out on stress leave or who are retiring. And so, that organization is in this kind of terminal spiral, and that's when it's most dangerous. And so that's what we're dealing with is like, yes, more and more people are starting to see the truth, I think, of what this country was built on and the hopeless future that it's headed towards. But at the same time, the danger increases as we get closer and closer to these kinds of confrontations.
Yeah, and honestly, people, especially because I think there's a lot of progressive people in this country that do really care about these issues, but need to pull their heads out of their asses when it comes to the NDP and realize that the NDP is directly implicated in this project, and that simply just going up in every single election and voting for the NDP is not going to be enough. It's not enough to resolve any of these crises that we're talking about, whether it's the climate crisis or the crisis of genocide and in Indigenous communities. This is something that people need to get through their heads, because it's really incredible how many people are still sort of buy into this idea that they can sort of vote for the kind, benevolent social democrats that are going to do the nice thing, when it's clear as day they're overseeing this process right now in BC that you're directly implicated in, and they're just as guilty as any political party of continuing this process, despite whatever obstacles are in their way. People have to understand this basic idea.
Yeah, they're running cover for the machine, right? My most charitable possible interpretation is that they actually are relatively powerless in the face of these entrenched systems. The police, we were just talking about this federal militia, the RCMP in Canada have the powers of the FBI and a National Guard all rolled into one. Yeah. They're called a police force, but they're an incredibly powerful institution with guns. And these cops, I think, absolutely have the power to intimidate or to dig up dirt on individual politicians. And, these politicians are just sitting around waiting to collect their pensions, most of them. So they do say, we don't direct the RCMP. And while they have the tools to do so, and that's a total cop-out, I think the real politic of it is that a lot of these politicians are totally cowed by the oil lobbyists, the police commanders, and these unelected centers of power really do have obviously an enormous influence in determining policy and legislation. So yeah, electoralism is not going to get us out of this. And voting for nicer managers of the colonial machine isn't going to lower the body count.
Yeah, Well, I mean, that's when we talk about Canada being a fake country. That's part of it, right? It's because it's not our politicians that have the power to change this thing. Our whole system of government is basically a facade that's there to give us this illusion that we have some kind of democratic input into the way that the country is run, which doesn't actually exist because it's not the government, it's not the federal government that runs this country. It's the oil companies, the fossil fuel extraction companies, the logging companies, the mining companies. They're the ones that are in charge, and the RCMP are their hired guns. And our whole system of government is just there to give us this idea that we have some kind of input into the system, which does not exist. Yeah. Yeah.
It's refreshing to hear a white guy just say it out loud.
Well, yeah, we got to start calling it like it is. We got to, like you said, time is short. We can't really pretend to that any of this makes sense anymore. We have to start being honest with ourselves and with each other about what is actually going on here. And I really appreciate what both of you guys do. Really, really inspiring. I'm really, really happy that you could call in. From these conditions and report from this blockade. It's really, really great to have you come on the show to break all these things down. Colin, do you want to let us know where we can find your the media work you do and the kind of stuff that you're trying to promote while you're engaging in these kind of blockades?
Well, it's a bit of a mouthful, but it's Get Loose from Hetwit Media. And that's on Facebook, Instagram, and now Twitter.
Yeah, Twitch.
Yeah, maybe we'll get to Twitch.
Oh no, you got banned on TikTok, right?
Yeah, banned on TikTok.
Oh boy!
Apparently, our Gold Commander series was too
hot for TikTok.
Yeah,
there may have been a Christmas video involving live swine, and it got banned on TikTok. So luckily you can still find it on the Instagram channel and on Twitter.
Yeah, it's so we do a lot of our updates there. It's in many ways like a community page. Like it belongs to our house group, the Get Loose from Hetwit. Recently we've used it kind of as a speaking stand for other Gitxsan houses and for the fight that's been happening here in Stikiodanach on Spoke territory. And yeah, just thank you for having us on. And I really appreciate the opportunity to shout out some of the work that we're doing. And yeah, I guess last thing I want to say is we got to kill Coastal GasLink. We got to get a victory here.
Blow it up. Metaphorically.
That's exactly.
What is dead cannot die, Rob. It's just a headless snake. That's what Zahale says. The Wet'suwet'en wing chief who went and captured 12 of their heavy bulldozers and heavy equipment. He called it a headless snake, and it's an apt description, right? It's just a corporate vehicle. It's just a conglomerate of state-owned oil companies from halfway around the world. So their project has to die.
Mm-hmm.
Kai, you don't need to promote your stuff. It's fine. We know, not a big deal. We don't need to follow Kai. It's okay.
No. I would prefer if fewer people followed my stuff. Yeah.
No, I'll drop your Twitter in the chat as well.
Kai Nagata on Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah, check out the Gold Commander videos if you're looking for a laugh in dark times. Colin's really, I don't know, he's tapped into something. Yeah, check out the Get Loose from Hetwit Twitter and Instagram, and yeah, give it a follow, because you're just gonna get information that you're not gonna get anywhere else. There's no fucking reporters. There's no media outlets up here, period. The only time the story gets out is when Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en people tell the story themselves. I mean, the Rebel came in once, I think, 2 years ago. And once
I'm sure they had some very fair reporting from our journalist friends there. Yeah.
It was fair and balanced, but that's it. That's oh, you can hear the train coming now. Okay, well, we got to go log what kind of train this is and what it's carrying and how fast it's going. But yeah, thanks again for having us on, and thanks for your continued interest in this, Rob. It's really encouraging to see comrades from Montreal and all over the country just keeping this on the radar and supporting the front lines.
Yeah, it's absolutely my pleasure, and I'm hoping to see hopefully more such blockades popping up throughout the country. So again, thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. It was great to talk to you.